Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Health Wire show. My name is Jason Berry, and I'm the editor of Digital Health Wire and the host of the show. Today, I am super excited to be joined by Jenn Goldsack, who is the CEO of the Digital Medicine Society. When I put it in the newsletter, I call it DiMe. Jenn, it's great to have you here.
Jason, it's always great to have the opportunity to talk to you, and we're working on some really exciting stuff right now. So lots of ground to cover.
Okay, yep, you've had a big week. You just wrapped Healthcare 2030 Summit. What was that earlier this week on Monday?
That's right.
Alrighty. So I'm sure most of our readers are pretty familiar at this point with the work that you're doing at DiMe, kind of writ large. But for anyone who isn't, could you give us a little bit of an overview on what you're doing at DiMe, how you're helping out the entire ecosystem, really, of digital health, startups, the providers, the payers, all of it? And then I want to talk about the summit and the thesis that came out, which was gorgeous from the summit.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, for folks who might not know DiMe, we are a global nonprofit. And the gap that we look to fill in the market is as we digitize healthcare, this enormous industry, the last industry to really resist digitization wholesale, despite being a $4.8 trillion domestic industry and $11.5 trillion international sort of ecosystem. We think about the fact that there are some sort of pieces of progress that need to be driven by individual entities, by bold innovators, by smart internal investments, by good strategic decisions. And of course, it's healthcare. So there are some things where we're going to have to look to our policymaking colleagues and to our regulatory colleagues in order to drive forward progress. But there's an enormous gap in between. There are pieces where incentives may not be aligned, and it's not the job of the policymakers to look across different stakeholders and figure out how we connect the dots to drive a double bottom line when we are thinking about the digitization of healthcare, efforts that return to both patients and to investors. Because this is a commercial enterprise, it's hard to think about what does a good evidentiary framework look like when it's not a regulated product. We need to be able to give developers a really clear signal for what good looks like to de-risk those efforts. We also need to make it easier for healthcare systems and payers and maybe individual patients to make decisions about what's high quality and trustworthy. So that's where DiMe comes in. We look to sit between those individual business decisions and policy levers to say, we want to speed and de-risk the digitization of healthcare so that our industry can actually survive. And most importantly, so the patients that it exists to care for and all of those people caring for them, whether it's care partners or clinicians, actually have support so that all of this investment that we're making drives towards a healthy future system.
Mm-hmm. And I have my work cut out for me just writing about this ecosystem that you're referring to. So I'm glad we have amazing humans like you in the trenches driving actual change. As far as the Healthcare 2030 Summit, tell me all about it. What were the highlight reels? What was the goal of kind of bringing all these folks together? Who attended? And what were you looking to get out of it and kind of bring to the summit?
Well, on brand for DiMe, we only started talking about this about 10 weeks ago, which has caused a few people to say, hang on a minute, and then sit down. What we've been hearing increasingly loudly from both our sort of industry colleagues and government colleagues is a pretty consistent set of themes. So from our industry colleagues, what we're hearing is there are real economic headwinds right now, right? Whether that's, we know what's happening with Medicaid and folks sort of not having coverage, they're not going to be able to seek care that's going to be reimbursed. We also know that we are, sort of removing sort of funding for biomedical research, which is the underpinning of medical product development. These are all the sorts of headwinds that we're facing alongside patients using the system more than ever when they can access it, because we're seeing a higher acuity in the patient population despite our efforts, despite our investment. And so we're at this moment where there's sort of pain being felt by the industry. They need to figure out how they position themselves in order to overcome all of these financial headwinds. There's the obvious opportunity, which is we're in a moment of technological advancement at the pace of which we've never seen in our industry. And remember, not all technology is digital. So we've done brilliant things with molecules, with sort of gene therapies, and still the pace of change with the digitization of healthcare, new flows of data, new technology is exciting, but it's absolutely overwhelming to think about, gosh, what's trustworthy? And what we're hearing is we have our industry colleagues who know that they have a limited hand to play. They have limited chips that they can place on the board in terms of their strategy to save their health system, or the investments that they make to keep their rare disease sort of drug development team even intact within their organization. They know that technology is where they need to be thoughtful, but it's really hard to actually think about, in a moment where it has to be a successful decision, it has to generate ROI, both for patients and frankly, commercially. How on earth do you decide what to do next? And in talking to our government colleagues, this aligns beautifully with their strategy. They are thinking about a future of healthcare where data is currency, where we are sort of creating a backbone and infrastructure in order to carry that. The administration, frankly, is relying on the digitization of healthcare to overcome the sort of maldistribution of patients in rural areas and the clinician sort of experts that we need to rely on to care for them. They've been very clear about what their goals and ambitions are, but the gap in the middle is, yes, but what do I do today? And then how does that generate some kind of ROI that I can reinvest? What does our strategy look like? What's the problem we need to solve for? Can you help me de-risk that? Can you give me a strategy beyond, oh, isn't this sepsis model interesting? Which is not to dismiss individual tools and solutions coming down the pike, but single solutions alone are not going to actually preserve public health, healthcare delivery, and medical product development in a really tough moment. That's what Healthcare 2030 set out to do. That's what the thesis is intended to support members of our community with, to guide those decisions, to show where the industry is. And we supplemented it with the summit on Monday, because what we wanted to do is not just to say, here's the roadmap, but also to bring the true leaders in our field to the table to share, this is what we've worked on. Here's an example of where we've started to make inroads. Here's how we're connecting the dots. Here's how we're making investments. And in some cases, here's where we've made investments and it actually hasn't worked, and I wouldn't do that again. We want not only to give the roadmap, but to supplement it with salient examples from our community to give confidence to the market to keep driving.
Well, I'll definitely make sure to link to the roadmap, the thesis, in the show notes for this episode. Could you kind of just dive right into it and let us know what's the general structure look like? You just framed it up pretty nicely right there. But what are some of the focus areas that you think, the levers that the industry can pull or the system can pull to kind of make sure that the US healthcare industry at large is sustainable and thriving in 2030 and beyond?
So now, I haven't been well this year, so I haven't been at as many conferences, but where I have been able to attend or where they've been virtual, I think the question that I terrorize everyone during a sort of panel discussion or whatever it looks like on, this is how we're going to use AI is, yes, but what's the plan? And, when I say this, it's like, we're thinking about how do we evaluate the performance of a model? How do we think about ongoing governance? How do we think about, this new revenue cycle management tool? Where does that fit into our plan? But when I ask the question, but what's the plan? What do we, if we are investing hundreds of billions of dollars into data infrastructure, technological innovation right now, if all we do is sort of sprinkle these point solutions into broken workflows and bolt them on to systems that are failing to serve the patients our entire industry exists to care for, do we ever think that we are going to, one, get any kind of commercial return on the sorts of investments that we're making now? And two, do we actually think it's going to fundamentally change our healthcare system enough so that it can provide access, so that it can care for people, so that we're not burning our clinicians out? And so what we wanted to do was actually try and answer that question of like, what's the plan? It's not just, we should use AI. To do what? What do we imagine a sustainable future looks like? What does healthcare look like in the digital era, in the AI era? And so what we wanted to do was to set up some very clear North Stars so that as people are making tactical decisions, writing strategic plans, thinking about how it's not just a individual decision by decision play, but a true drive towards transformation, what should we keep in mind? And so what we have proposed in the Healthcare 2030 Impact Thesis is 4 areas of focus. that we at DiMe are going to be focused on, that we are going to partner with the rest of the ecosystem on, and that I believe really reflect the goals of the administration and where government investment is going to go to. Mm. So the first one, Jason, is we are looking at prevention. We are looking at moving healthcare upstream. Essentially, what we have now is a system where we sit patiently in a clinic, waiting for a patient to present already with symptoms, sick, at the doors of the clinic, and then we evaluate how good we are based on how good we are doing a patch-up job. Mm-hmm. Have the ability to capture data and information, process it, not just within the walls of the clinic, but also outside. We have these high-resolution, rich flows of data from ambient technologies, from different kinds of wearable technologies, even sort of non-clinical data, right, can inform someone's risk of getting sick. We can actually start to meet people where they are before they have a catastrophic outcome and before they become, frankly, very expensive for the system. So we want to think about prevention, moving care upstream. Mm-hmm. The other piece we want to think about is personalization. One of the things that I think sometimes we forget that's magic about technology is that it can be truly modular and we can adjust it. We can use data that is to sort of make truly personalized decisions. We get it every time we log on to Netflix. Why shouldn't we expect that with our healthcare? And I'll be a little bit less flippant than talking about Netflix, Jason. And I know that you've had some experience of this in your family too. I'm battling a late stage cancer diagnosis, and I can't tell you what it feels like to sit opposite your oncologist and be making decisions about treatment pathways that might or might not save your life. Mm-hmm. And to have what you think is a data-driven discussion, only to find out that it's not really, because none of the data that you were just evaluating, there hasn't been a single clinical trial for any of the drugs on the market that actually include a patient that looks like you. Mm-hmm. And you realize that at best, you are making life-saving, hopefully, decisions based on an educated guess. There is absolutely no reason for that to happen. Data is not trapped in a manila file in a filing cabinet with only the practice manager or the PI having the key anymore. With the appropriate permission, we know anecdotally that there are young people across the country, across the world right now who are getting late stage colon cancer diagnosis, but we can't capture that in real time. How are we thinking about data liquidity? How are we thinking about our ability to harness compute to actually make every decision a personalized decision? We can do that with the technology we have today. We just have to build a system that works it into the workflow. The third piece is health outcomes. And one of the things that we are guilty of in our industry, and I'm sure that you ask this question of folks you speak to all the time, and certainly, how do you know if this piece of technology works? It's healthcare. Does the person get better? And we are so afraid of answering that question. Our entire industry is based off process. Did we administer this test? Was this test provided? Was this follow-up done? We don't think about outcomes. And I don't know how we ever move towards a future of value-based care or outcomes-based reimbursement, which is, I think, where we need to get to beyond fee-for-service, if we don't have the courage to actually measure outcomes. Now, admittedly, outcomes are a lagging indicator. We need to think about measures of quality and trustworthiness before we invest. And we have things like the DiMe seal to do that. But, we really want to force ourselves as we digitize healthcare to have the courage as an ecosystem, as an industry across the board, to look at the success of the industry as to whether we are healthier as a society. That's our definition of success. And maybe it seems redundant to think about the fourth sort of area of focus for a plan that's supposed to drive sustainability as being sustainability, but it was intentional because it's important. And when we sort of break it down, Jason, and it sort of gives you a chuckle, right? But I mean, I think if you spoke to the CFOs of the majority of healthcare systems in the United States and said, do you believe that your system will be solvent in 3 years? Most of them would say no, because most of them have been running a negative margin for several years already. And you know what they're facing. I think that you would see that even for systems that are being successful. I think, we've seen earnings projections from large payers abandoned this year. We know that our sort of drug development colleagues are having a rough time of it. We have to think about sustainability, and we get pretty specific on this in Healthcare 2030. We think about sustainability from a true affordability perspective. at a societal level and at the individual level, those kitchen table conversations. We think about it in terms of sustainability for the clinical workforce. We know what pressure our clinical colleagues are under right now. We know we don't have a big enough clinical workforce and that we risk losing too many, mostly from departing the industry, but also, I mean, our clinicians have a higher suicide rate in the United States than any other profession. We've got to address it. And then the last piece of sustainability is commercial sustainability. And we live in a country where our healthcare model is based on a commercial model. We have to think about all of the investment that's going into this technology development. We have to think about all of this investment that's going into novel modalities of care. It has to return. You actually have to think about commercial viability, and we're not afraid to do that, recognizing it's part of a double bottom line, outcomes and commercial success. So our hope in putting this together, Jason, is that we actually give people clarity to say, if I'm going to come up with a series of strategic decisions that I have to execute on in order to keep pushing my system forward, or to think about what my sort of health tech portfolio is going to look like, focus on these 4 things. It's going to align all of the different stakeholders. And at DiMe, I'm proud of, I would tell you all day, that our superpower is bringing those different stakeholders together. And I think we proved that on Monday. But if we have government, and I think they are, in fairness, if we have our payer colleagues, our healthcare delivery colleagues, if we have our research colleagues, if we have the sort of investors and tech innovators all focused on the definition of a sustainable, successful healthcare system in 2030 is one where we've actually done a good job of prevention. It's a healthcare system, not a sick care system, where we're really doing a good job of delivering personalized care, which, by the way, is the most equitable care as well. That we're actually holding ourselves to account when it comes to health outcomes. It's not just process. And then it's a sustainable system. We're going to be in a fundamentally different environment to how we are today. And that's where we need to get to. And we are being bold with the 5-year time horizon, but I don't think we can wait much longer. And the tools exist.
Well, it's a great map to get there. I imagine that you had a lot of cartographers on board to help you draw that one, or I'm sure you could also pull it off at just a whiteboard. What does 2030 look like for Jenn? Thank you for sharing it. I'll make sure to get everyone linked to that in the show notes. Jenn, thank you for coming on the show, kind of walking us through the work that you're doing, and we'll be following along. If there's any way we can help, you know where to find me, you know where to find our readers, and please get in touch with Jenn if you read through the thesis and anything you see you might be able to help with or get on board with or support this roadmap. Much appreciated. It takes a village. Jenn, thanks for coming on.
Jason, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Cheers. This has been the Digital Health Wire Show. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.